Welcome to the Probate Nation. My name is Richard Ruddy and I'm the host of the program. We have discussed over the course of many shows how executors should deal with various assets that must go through probate. Tonight we are going to step into the shoes of a beneficiary who has inherited real estate. Many beneficiaries want to know when they can become owners of the property, or why the land records do not show them as the owner, or they seek guidance on dealing with mortgages that still remain on the property they just inherited. And there are a host of very practical considerations that come with inheriting property, such as, should I change the locks? Do I need to set up utility accounts in my own name? When and how can I sell the property? Should I sell through a realtor? Or should I sell to one of the cash buyers advertising in my community? This show will answer these questions and much more. We are pleased to have with us today both a local realtor and attorney to help guide us through this discussion. Our first guest has been a full-time Virginia realtor for over 30 years and is presently with Keller Williams Real Estate. He previously hosted for a decade a talk show, radio show called Inside Real Estate. Presently, he is a co-host on the American Dream TV show. He is ranked as one of the top realtors in the D.C. metro area by Washingtonian Magazine. Our second guest practices law with the Falls Church law firm of Sam D. Scholar, P.C. His practice focus is family estate planning, wills and trusts, probate, and estate administration. He graduated from Duke Law School and received a Master's of Law in Taxation from Georgetown Law Center. Please welcome Realtor Terry Roach and Attorney Sam Scholar. Hi, guys.
How are you?
Thanks you both for coming by, man. I've got all this brain power next to me. If I need to take care of inherited real estate, I know who to call, right?
All right.
Well, Sam, let's begin with how real estate is inherited in Virginia, because it is kind of peculiar. So if someone dies with a will, and they go ahead and put that will, and the will says I leave all my property to my son and daughter, or I have a specific bequest that says I give that piece of property to a son or daughter. You know, when do I actually become the owner of that property?
Well, the key thing is what they call probating the will, which basically is a fancy way of saying taking the will to the courthouse after making an appointment with the original will and death certificate, and putting that original will of record.
Okay.
And when that will goes on record, it's like a deed. It's recorded at the courthouse, and that's when the title passes, typically. Now there are some exceptions with a probated with a will. Sometimes the executor may have to sell the property to pay valid liens and deeds and expenses. But in the absence of that situation, the title will pass to the named beneficiaries.
And you make a good point. So we're really going to focus on this program. We don't have that sort of hanging over our head where we have to sell the property to pay the bills. So I'm now the inheritor. But let's just say someone dies and they do not have a will. So their property and their assets pass through something called intestacy. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, I asked the question: when do I become the owner of that property?
When you appear before the court and give the list of heirs showing who the beneficiaries are of the intestate estate, and that list of heirs is recorded, that becomes the chain of title.
Okay.
That indicates who the owners are.
So what Sam is really focusing on for our viewers is that the land records do not know that you've died. Okay. And the whole world does not know that. And even though technically the property has passed to you, even though we not recorded anything, no one knows that yet. And the process of recording the will or recording the list of heirs is a way in which to begin to build that chain of title to you folks who that inherited from your mom or your dad.
Correct.
Now, what is the best way to confirm ownership, their ownership of the real estate that they've just inherited? What's the best way to figure that out?
Well, you can always get a title search. I think it's very important to get a title search to see not only what your interests are, but to see if there's any liens out there too. Because you may not know or be aware of potential liens against the property. Okay,
that's true. So I've inherited this property, Terry. I'm happy the paperwork's been filed or soon to be filed. Should the real estate be secured in some way, and how would I do that?
Yeah, actually that's critical because you've got a vacant property generally. No one's moved into it. Sometimes it happens, but changing the locks, critical. Changing utilities, worrying about winterizing the property if it's in the winter. You don't want pipes freezing, things like that. That's very, very important.
How about that refrigerator packed with food?
Well, Yeah, that's a very good point. Let's just say cleaning the property really well because we don't know how it's been left. Because we've run into properties where we've found other inhabitants that weren't necessarily human.
Sure. And I think the changing the locks is important, as you mentioned, because you don't know who mom and dad might have given a key with it, and a neighbor or someone like that to help out in case something happened.
Absolutely.
So changing those locks are important. Now, but tell me, why is it important to secure the property?
Well, we've actually had situations where we've come in to secure the property and we've found what's known as a tenant at sufferance, people living in the property. Don't want to use any derogatory terms, but who don't belong there, let's just put it that way, and taking advantage of the situation. And that creates a whole mess legally, as you know. So securing the property for that, securing it from just local hoodlums that want to go in and take what's left.
Sure. Well, Sam, let's turn now. We secured the property, okay? As Terry said, typically no one's probably living there. It probably is empty. Does the fire and casualty insurance that mom or dad had on the property, that continue after they've died?
That's a good question. No, that's the problem. A lot of people mistakenly think that they can keep paying the premium and they're covered, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. It's a whole different, you must notify the insurance company right away and let them know what the situation is. Some insurance companies will not insure a vacant house, and those that do will charge more for it. It's a different risk.
Sure. If the property is vacant, does that have any implication for insurance coverage? I think Sam has just indicated it could have implications.
With certain insurance companies, it does. As a matter of fact, we've actually had situations where we couldn't get a property insured, so we rented it temporarily just so we could get insurance on the property, because if it burns, you've lost everything.
Sure. Yeah. Now, is the prior claims history from mom and dad, if they've had some issues, can that cause some problems in even getting the insurance if you have to replace insurance?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because lately, yes, with any property, but 2-3 claims on a property, other insurance companies pick that up, and some of them won't even insure it because they think, well, the property's got too many problems. So 3 claims, we're just not going to insure it at all. So you don't know that until you go for insurance.
Well, the next thing that occurs to me, of course, is you have utilities, you have real estate, and you have mortgages. So, Sam, who's responsible for the utilities on the property that you've just inherited?
Well, you are. The owners are. So once title has passed, the owners, however many they are now partners in crime. They have to deal with all those expenses.
And what about the real estate taxes? Who's
Same
responsible
thing.
for that? So they got to. So how do we obviously need to go communicate with folks and the utility authorities and get the names changed.
Absolutely.
Make sure that you have the credit and all that kind of stuff. And same thing with the real estate people. You got to let them know to send the tax bill to you.
Absolutely.
Because they don't know who you are. They're not going to try to chase you down. Who's responsible for So who's responsible for the real estate tax on the property you inherit? We talked about that. And who's responsible for the mortgages, though, on the property? Let's talk about that.
Well, the mortgages are, it's a good question. If the property is taken subject to the mortgage, if the will says it goes subject to the mortgage, then the people who inherit it have to then look after the mortgage and make arrangements.
Okay.
Typically, there's a process where they can refinance it if necessary. If they're not going to sell it, they're either going to sell it or refinance.
Yeah, the mortgage companies can be somewhat difficult to deal with when you inherit property, though.
It can be. It can be. It's a case by case basis. Some want to be paid right away. Some will give you some time. It depends on the company.
Sure.
But most of them will expect to get paid monthly on the existing mortgage.
Yeah, you don't want to ignore that.
No.
Okay. Even if it's not your obligation, it might be an obligation of the estate to pay the mortgage off. If someone doesn't pay it, then you could run into problems and you could be dealing with foreclosure issues and stuff like that. So you don't want to ignore that. Let's continue on that. Sam, let's just talk about, now I got all this stuff squared away. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the property yet, but I'm thinking I might want to rent it. Who can sign all the paperwork to rent the property?
Ideally, all the owners. If you have more than one owner, you want all the owners, all the people that are entitled should be signing the deed.
Okay.
The lease.
The lease.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same thing with the act. If I'm going to sell the property, of course, we had a bunch of closing documents, the key one of which, of course, is the deed.
Right.
Who can sign that?
Same people. All the people that have a property interest have to sign the deed.
Okay. So obviously, if we have some disagreement among folks about what to do, then we could run into some issues.
Correct.
Okay, we'll talk about how we solve those problems. Terry, let's talk about steps to prepare the property for sale. Are there some basic to-dos that need to be completed before you list a property for sale?
Well, yes, if you're intending on listing it for sale, full retail, besides all the other items we talked about securing the property, you need somebody to go through, give a professional opinion on the market analysis, the market value, what it would take to get there, all the different steps to staging the property, preparing the insides, paint, carpet, updating appliances, whatever the goal is. So,
okay, so the key is, of course, is what the objectives are.
Exactly.
So that sort of frames which things on that to-do list you need to do.
yeah, we generally have two paths we're going down, retail or whole-sale. And
Sure.
if we're retailing it,
Sure.
that's where we go.
Now, what are some of the steps you recommend and why? Okay, some things, generally for everything, whether you're retail or not,
Okay.
there's some basic steps you recommend. I think you mentioned something about having the property inspected by a home inspector?
So if we're going to retail it, yes. Having it inspected by a home inspector for several reasons. Number one, we have heirs that have never even seen the house, and some that have, but they have no idea what has or has not been maintained.
Sure.
You take on some liability generally when you're selling a piece of property in Virginia. So it's everything's as is, but if there are things you should have known about or could have known about that are defects, you possibly could be held liable for that. So we want to make sure we inspect everything and disclose everything that we may or may not know about.
Okay. How about getting the property appraised? Why would we do that? And would we do that as of date of death, or would we do it just currently?
Definitely when you're ready to sell it, at least for selling purposes. For taxation, that might be a different issue. But for selling purposes, getting it appraised or getting a really good market analysis from a top realtor to give you an indication of how you could get the most money for it.
Okay.
Again, based on the objectives, but
Sure. I guess the appraisal, the other reason to get it appraised is if you're thinking about listing it for some particular dollar amount, you might want to be able to show somebody that it wouldn't appraise for that. And so that's just kind of an unrealistic number in the scheme of things. Is that possible?
Where that really helps is when you've got multiple heirs.
Yes.
And one heir wants this, one
Sure.
heir wants this, and the appraiser's going to even that out.
Gotcha.
So, yeah,
Okay.
That's
Okay.
really why we do it.
Okay. Well, let's continue. Let's talk about some of the property repairs and improvements. Again, we're going down the retail side. If your goal is to get full retail value, what are the key areas of the house to address, Terry?
Well, the most important areas of the house are paint and carpet because it's everywhere in your peripheral vision all the time.
Right.
First impression, last impression, everything. So people think, oh, I'll give a credit for this or a credit for that. No, that just doesn't work because in the buyer's eyes, it already looks bad. Kitchen, master bedroom, family room, the three most important rooms to focus on and update if you can.
Okay. Now, sometimes when people inherit property, they're property rich but cash poor.
Yes.
Okay. And they'd like to go the retail side, but they don't have the resources to do it.
Right.
Okay. So, any solutions to that other than going to a cash buyer?
Yeah, well, that's what the cash buyers would want you to believe, and there are other resources. My business, other realtors will have contractors that specialize in helping people out, and they won't collect any money until the actual settlement.
Oh, really?
Not all will do that, but there are some companies out there that will do that, as well as some contractors. And obviously, when you're providing probate service to somebody, that's something that you really want to do. If their only reason for wholesaling is because they don't have the money, that shouldn't be your only reason. I mean, if we can provide those services or find people out there that can do that, put more money in your pocket, you need to avail them of those options because they're walking away from a lot of money potentially.
And people understand that if contractors were to do that, they're not doing it just for their contracting service. They're now taking a risk in doing that, so they're going to ask to participate in some of the upside from the sale of the property.
Yeah.
And that all gets worked out, I guess.
That gets worked out. It's two different ways. Some of them will literally charge interest on a monthly basis. Some of them will want a little extra of it. But yeah, there's risk inherent. So
Sure. Now, we talked about the key rooms. I'm trying to get full retail, and I think you mentioned that if you're doing full retail, that you believe staging the property is actually a good thing. So let's just talk about this so we don't get too quickly. What does it mean to stage a property?
right. So staging a property means two things. It means besides, it has nothing to do with the paint and the carpet. It has to do with creating an environment in an empty room that invites the imagination to understand what that room could be used for. So it's generally be furniture, it's going to be accoutrements that go along with it. It's going to be suggesting, because most buyers lack imagination even though they think they have it, it's going to be suggesting what a room could be used for. So it's going to be renting furniture, having a professional stager come in, stage the home, and it works. It really works well. I mean, we have all kinds of studies that show the percentages above the cost of staging that you can make.
So you
from
do get a
staging.
return on your dollar.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, and that's good to know. Now staging can be vary in cost depending on how big your house is that you're going to stage, but you have to sort of judge that as well.
That's a good yeah, so we're staging the kitchen, the family room, the master bedroom, the living room, and the dining room. We're not working secondary bedrooms and things. We don't worry about that stuff.
Okay. Sam, let's turn now. You know, I've staged my property. I've got it up there going. Utilities are in my name. I'm getting tired of paying those. I'd like to sell this puppy and get it sold. First off, who must sign the deed? Let's go back and just refresh everybody's.
Sure. The people are on record as being the title owners. So if it's 4 brothers and sisters, and all of them have to sign.
Okay. So at this point, they've signed the listing agreement, so everybody's agreed to list it.
Right.
So we get to closing, we're going to assume that we're not going to have a problem
We
getting
hope.
the deed signed, but that's important. We need everybody to sign. What type of deed is, there's different types of warranties that come with these deeds. So what type of deed is typically given in a sale of a house that I've inherited?
Well, I think most standard realtor provided contracts are going to say general warranty deed. That's the highest level of protection for the buyer, and that's what most buyers want is a general warranty deed.
Yeah, generally selling out of an estate, though, I think most executors will only want to give you a special warranty deed.
Correct, if the executor is involved. So it
Sure.
depends upon whether the executor is selling it or whether the 4 heirs are selling it.
Sure, of course, and we're talking about the heirs. What type of title insurance issues can arise with the sale of property that I've inherited?
And that's a big surprise to people. Basically, when the property goes back to when that property is that appointment occurs at the Commissioner of Accounts, and when that starts a 1-year clock ticking. When that meeting occurs, there's a 1-year clock for any creditor to show up and say, hey, I have a property, I have an interest in getting paid, which becomes a potential lien on the property. To make a long story short, most title companies are going to require that the sales proceeds are held in escrow for 1 year from the date of the qualification of the estate. And then one thing that the buyers can ask for is to have it put into a separate interest-bearing account, because it could be a lot of money, and nowadays there's interest again. So I think a lot of buyers are well advised sellers are well advised to make sure they get interest in that money while it's held in escrow.
Now, if somebody wants to go and get their money early, before that, I think some of those title companies
definitely
offer the
do.
ability
Yes.
to get the money. You pay a fee for
For a
that.
fee, yes.
And of course, you remain liable if something comes up. You're going to have to give the money back if there's
Correct.
some sort of problem that shows up within that 1-year period. But you could get it, but most people let it sit because the cost of getting it is kind of expensive.
Right, it
That's
could be
my
several
recollec-
$1,000s.
Yeah, my
right.
recollection was kind of expensive. What are some of the common problems that the two of you have encountered when we're at the closing table? You know, from a legal perspective, why don't you just touch that and then we'll jump into do
It could be a lot of things. I think generally they have what they call a walkthrough, and at the walkthrough sometimes there are disagreements about whether something's in working order or not, or whether that was a condition that was in at the time of the contract. You get into a lot of those issues.
Okay.
There's a-
Terry, how about things you run into?
Yeah, I run into the walkthrough issues as well. Those are generally able to be worked out. The bigger problems I run into, frankly, are emotional ones. You've got
You
heirs.
mentioned that when we were preparing for the show, people have sort of a seller remorse.
Yeah, it's a seller remorse. You know what it is? It really is. It's a finality of the passing of the loved one, and it just got real fast, and that's it. And they're having some people. I've had people walk out, and they just weren't able to. The legal issues aside, they just weren't able to perform, and eventually they came back, but it's tough financially. That's the bigger issue.
We like to get those
I mean,
types
emotionally,
of
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah.
We like to get those types of folks to sign the deed remotely and not come to closing because they're going to stir everybody else up. And
Yeah.
upset them all.
It can get upsetting for everybody.
Of
yeah.
course. Now, we mentioned, about, we see this all the time about cash buyers, and I've had many situations where the cash buyers want to come in and buy. So let's talk a little bit about cash buyers, and how fast they can go to settlement. What kind of offers can somebody expect to get from a cash buyer? Terry?
Well, there's kind of a standard rule of thumb in the wholesale industry that a cash buyer is going to give you up to 70% of the ARV, which means as repaired value. So if something's worth $1 million, they're going to give you up to $700,000, assuming it's already repaired. If it's not, they're going to also discount those repairs as well. And people think, well, that's an enormous discount. Well, it is, but there's a lot of costs involved with these quote-unquote wholesalers, fixing it up, flipping it, maintaining it. And they're trying to be honest with you, a lot of these cash buyers aren't really the buyer. They're what we call wholesale flippers.
Sure.
They're trying to flip it to somebody else,
Sure.
and they actually assign the contract. So there's a lot of middlemen involved in those types of
So how,
situations.
we see these notices, go to close in 10 days, 7 days, whatever. Is that really true? How fast do cash buyers typically go to closing?
I will tell you, 85% of them, maybe 90% of them, are going to want a 60 to 90-day closing. Some of the bigger ones will close in 7 days, but the reason I say that is because most of them aren't really the buyer.
They don't have the money to actually make the
A
deal.
lot of them went to a late night TV seminar and they're out there trying to flip houses. So the real ones, yeah, they can close that fast, but a lot of them don't even close that fast because lack of funds, because they're doing other things.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier in the show, but what is a better alternative to a cash buyer if you do not have the resources, the time, or both to prepare the property for a full retail sale? What's the better? Is there a better option?
Yes, there are a few of us out there in the real estate community that provide more than just the services of selling a home. We bring in contractors, we bring in stages, we bring everything in so it's soup to nuts. So you're sitting back and you're just saying, write me the check when it's ready. Just because, to be honest, that's kind of the bane of my existence in working probate, is watching people be taken advantage of in that type of a situation. So a lot of us are tired of it. And so we've decided, well, gosh, if that's the only thing that people need is they don't have money, let's provide all the services so that they can get the benefit of the money.
So that's something to keep in mind. If people know there's options out there, need to
Lots
ask,
of options
need to
from a
ask
lot
their
of
realtor
realtors.
when they get to that point.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about lessons learned. I think we'll draw on. We have maybe a minute or so, real quickly. What are some of the lessons learned that you've learned, sometimes the hard way, about selling inherited real estate? Sam, anything you'd like to add there?
I think it's communication. I think for some reason, when property is inherited, like you were talking about emotion, I think a lot of times in these situations, people bring up things that may have happened 30 years ago when they were kids, and they bring it up now and trying to make up for that or get a comeuppance. So I think people have to be careful of that and just try to focus on the current reality.
How about yourself, Terry?
I would say, 3 words, over and over and over: educate the seller, educate the seller, educate the seller, because they're not focused. And emotionally is where they exist, and there's a lot to go through with probate. So consistently educating them and guiding them.
Okay. Well, guys, lots of great information. Let's just get some sort of final thoughts, from the program, things you want to emphasize for folks as we go ahead and close out this program. Sam, how about yourself?
Well, I think for most people, I think it's important that they take it one step at a time, find a good attorney to help them, a good probate attorney, collect all the papers they need, and just try to have a plan. I think that's the most important thing. And it's a hard time because they've just lost someone they care about, but unfortunately, you have to kind of put that to the side and try to focus one step at a time on the process. Sure. And there's a lot of details, and a lot of things that can go wrong. So you want to get good.
It is
good
not
people.
necessarily. We try to emphasize it's not a do-it-yourself process, although many folks like to do it, and we certainly like to give them the opportunity to do that. But a lot of times they just can't get it done. Terry, how about yourself? Some final things you want to emphasize for our viewers?
Just quickly, it's probably the most intrinsically involved transaction I ever do in real estate. There are so many moving parts. So I would suggest, like Sam says, bring in professionals, but from the real estate end, bring a realtor in that has worked probate, that has all the services, because they really are your guide, your counselor, your advisor. They're going to walk you through everything because they're the hub of everything that's going on for months in your life, and that's usually the biggest asset.
Sure.
So you need someone who really knows what they're talking about and can guide you to full retail, hopefully.
Okay. Well, Sam and Terry, thank you both very much for all this great information. It's a great public resource for all of our viewers. And boy, the information and the experience you bring to the table is enormous. So we want to thank you for taking the time and talk to them.
My
It's been
pleasure.
a pleasure.
Great, thanks again. You know, when you inherit real estate, there are a host of to-do items that you need to consider before you rent or sell the real estate. Some of these require immediate attention, and others are recommended depending on your situation. Our guest this evening provided an excellent overview and explanations of the importance of each of these to-dos. The last thing you want to find out is that the house you inherited was destroyed by fire, but you had no fire insurance, or that closing on the sale of the house has to be delayed because of title issues, or the house was damaged during winter because you failed to winterize it. We encourage you to seek advice early from experienced real estate and legal professionals. These professionals can identify what needs to be done with your inherited real estate based on your specific situation. And once these tasks are completed, work with you to sell or rent your inherited real estate. Now, this concludes our show this evening, and we hope you found it helpful. Replays of this show and all the shows broadcast to date, along with other helpful information, can be viewed on the Probate Nation website. On behalf of the Probate Nation, thank you for visiting with us.